It started as a routine event until a liberal journalist tried to corner Trump. But his response? A fiery exchange that left everyone speechless. It was a momentous day at the Lincoln Memorial as the President of the United States arrived to deliver a speech honoring Abraham Lincoln and the nation's deep-rooted traditions. As he spoke passionately about MAGA and his vision of restoring America's former greatness, a sharp voice suddenly cut through the crowd from the reporter's row. "You think you're Abraham? You've built policies that put a full stop to the dreams of Abraham." For a moment, the crowd was stunned. Silence hanging in the air. This wasn't just a question. It was a direct accusation against Donald Trump's presidency and policies. Security moved swiftly toward the reporter, ready to cut the confrontation short. But Trump saw an opportunity, not to silence, but to assert his vision for making America great again. As his staff closed in, he raised a hand, signaling them to stop. Then, with a confident smirk, he addressed the reporter. "I like the way you think. Why don't you stand up so we can discuss this like civilized people?" The entire hall was in shock. Presidents rarely had the courage to directly engage with their toughest critics. But Trump had never followed convention. He redefined how a president should handle opposition, and his policies had already made him a prime target for tough questions. As the reporter stood, Trump got a clear look at her. She wasn't just any journalist, she was a familiar face, known for challenging his policies on live TV. A staunch liberal, she had confronted him before, but this time she was doing it face to face. As Trump laid eyes on her, recognition flashed across his face, but if anything, it only fueled his confidence. With his signature bravado, he smirked and said, "Oh, it's you. I've always wanted to meet you. I admire how you turn MAGA into controversy." The reporter didn't hesitate. "MAGA is a controversy in itself. If you're so committed to America first, why are you sending our soldiers to the Middle East now?" Her words echoed through the hall. Historians, political analysts, and keen-eyed spectators turned their gaze toward Trump, waiting to see how he would respond to the pointed challenge. Trump quickly realized this wouldn't be easy. Every word had to be chosen carefully. One misstep, and his response could be weaponized against him in the future. He knew how these moments played out in the media, and he wasn't about to hand his critics an easy montage. As tension filled the room, a seasoned political analyst leaned toward his colleague and murmured, "Trump is done. He should just walk away." His colleague nodded in agreement. "Any president who engages in a live debate like this digs his own political grave. We've seen it happen countless times." Both watched intently, expecting Trump to deflect or retreat. But to everyone's shock, he did something unprecedented. Instead of shutting down the confrontation, he made a bold move. He invited her onto the stage. The liberal reporter didn't hesitate. With a fiery glare, she accepted the invitation and shot back, "If you're as fearless as you claim, let's see how you handle real questions, without the teleprompter." With that, she strode onto the stage, ready for a showdown. As she stepped onto the stage, Trump remained composed, exuding an air of confidence and control. With a polite gesture, he welcomed her and offered her a seat. But the reporter had no interest in pleasantries. She was here for a fight. Wasting no time, she launched straight into her first question, the one that had already sent ripples through the audience. "Let's start with the question I asked earlier. If it's truly America first, why spend millions and deploy our soldiers to the Middle East?" Her tone was sharp, her intent clear. She hadn't come for a discussion, she had come for a takedown. The entire hall braced for Trump's response. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Every eye in the hall was locked onto the stage, watching the two figures seated across from each other. Donald Trump, calm and composed, and the liberal reporter, razor-sharp and relentless. A bead of sweat trickled down the back of a cameraman's neck as he adjusted his lens, ensuring not a second of this moment was missed. Trump leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. Confidence radiated from him, but there was a rare moment of calculation in his eyes. He paused, letting the weight of the question settle. The seconds stretched, thickening the silence like wet cement. "That's fair," he said, his voice steady but firm. "America first isn't America only. It means we take care of our own while protecting our interests everywhere." As he spoke, he measured the room, his gaze flickering subtly from one corner to the next. He knew the balance was delicate. Project strength without sounding insular, reassure without retreating. It was a fine line, and he had walked it before. His fingers tapped against the polished surface of the table, a barely perceptible rhythm of thought. The reporter crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. This was the response she had anticipated. Polished, practiced, devoid of surprise. She wasn't impressed. A knowing smile tugged at her lips as she cast a quick glance at the audience, letting the moment breathe before turning back to him. Her foot tapped twice beneath the table, a small tell of restrained impatience. "By sending young men and women to war?" she pressed, her voice sharp, unwavering. The microphone picked up the edge in her tone, amplifying it, sending a ripple of tension through the audience. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding in quiet agreement, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few chuckled at the reporter's sharp delivery, appreciating the challenge. But scattered applause and hushed whispers revealed a divided room, each side waiting for Trump's response. Trump nodded, unfazed, but there was a flicker of something, calculation, maybe even restraint. His jaw tensed for just a moment, a nearly imperceptible tightening before he exhaled, slow and deliberate. He had faced tougher questions, but this one carried weight. He couldn't appear reckless, yet he couldn't seem weak. The breath he took was deep, filling his lungs before he released it with measured control. "By making sure threats never reach our doorstep," he said, his tone measured. "We don't seek war, but we don't ignore danger either." A pause, just enough to let it sink in. Leadership means tough choices, and tough choices aren't always popular. A murmur spread through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, others exchanged skeptical glances. The reporter leaned forward, eyes sharp, sensing her moment. The cameras zoomed in. Her heartbeat thrummed in her ears, but her face remained neutral. "You talk about keeping America safe," she said, voice cutting through the room like a blade. "But under your administration, families were torn apart, children taken from their parents. Is that your definition of safety?" Gasps rippled through the press pool. The tension thickened. She held her ground, waiting for him to fumble, to break. Trump exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. No flicker of doubt, no hesitation, just cold resolve. His fingers curled slightly against the table's edge. "Nobody wants families separated," he said, his voice even. "But if you cross illegally, there are consequences. That's the law. No, no country." The silence that followed was deafening. A bead of sweat slid down the back of a man's neck in the front row. The reporter's lips curled into a knowing smirk. She had him cornered, at least that's what she thought. Leaning in, she delivered the blow, her voice laced with contempt. "So, compassion takes a backseat to policy?" The words echoed through the room, heavy with accusation. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in. Every lens, every eye, locked onto him, waiting. Trump didn't flinch. His expression remained unreadable, his voice steady as granite. "Compassion," he said, his tone firm, deliberate, "is protecting Americans, stopping traffickers, cutting off cartels, keeping jobs here." He let the weight of his words settle. Then, a final beat, sharp, unwavering. "That's real compassion." A hush fell over the room. Some nodded in approval, others whispered, uncertain. The reporter leaned in further, refusing to back down, her nails digging slightly into her palm beneath the table, hidden from view. The reporter's eyes gleamed. She smelled blood. "Let's talk about LGBTQ Americans." Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Under your presidency, transgender people were banned from the military. How is that freedom?" A hush fell, a few whispers, a rustle of shifting seats. Some reporters leaned in, waiting for the stumble, the moment of hesitation. Cameras inched closer, lenses tightening on his face. Trump tilted his head, unreadable. He let the question hang, absorbing the tension before answering. "The military isn't a social experiment," he said, voice steady. "It's about strength, readiness, security." He paused, letting the words land. "That's what my generals told me. That's what I did." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in approval. Others exchanged glances, whispering behind their hands. A woman in the front row scoffed. The reporter's grip on her pen tightened. "So, you're saying transgender people weaken the military?" she pressed, her voice unrelenting. Trump shook his head, unfazed. His voice was firm, measured. "I'm saying we focus on keeping our military the strongest," he said. "Decisions are made on facts, not feelings." Scattered applause broke out. A few heads nodded. Others stiffened, arms crossed. A man in the front row scoffed under his breath. The reporter leaned in, undeterred. Trump watched her carefully, his own muscles coiled beneath his suit. He was ready for the next blow, but she was too. The battle raged on, unspoken but undeniable, in the air between them. As the liberal reporter surged forward, fire in her eyes, ready to unleash another furious question, Trump raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Where are you from?" he asked, his tone calm but pointed. The room fell into a brief, stunned silence. The reporter blinked, caught off guard. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras tightened their focus. For a moment, the dynamic shifted. Now, she was the one on the spot. The reporter hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. The sharp confidence she carried a moment ago wavered. "How does that matter?" she asked, her voice not as steady as before. Her brow furrowed, suspicion creeping in. Trump shrugged, his expression unreadable, his tone almost casual. "I just want to know, please." Silence thickened the air. The weight of 100 eyes pressed down on her. She straightened, forcing composure back into her stance. "My ancestors hail from Italy," she said, her voice firmer now. "But I was born here." Trump nodded slowly, then leaned in just enough to make the moment feel heavier. His voice was calm, deliberate, but the words cut like a blade. "Has anyone ever evicted you?" he asked, his eyes locked onto hers. "Have you ever faced racism? A threat? Anything you claim I spread?" The room tensed. A ripple of murmurs. Some exchanged glances waiting for her response. Others simply stared. For the first time, the reporter wasn't the one in control. The reporter's eyes widened, a brief flash of surprise betraying her, but she refused to accept defeat. She steadied herself, her grip tightening on the microphone. "This isn't about me," she shot back, her voice sharp, defiant. "It's about those you oppress." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some leaned in, sensing a pivotal moment. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Trump exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He knew this debate could cost him everything: his presidency, his legacy. The safer move was to step back, let it go, but he couldn't. The sane inside him refused to retreat. This was his moment, not just to win, but to prove he was right. Trump didn't flinch. His gaze locked onto hers, unwavering, unshaken. The air in the room had thickened, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Then he spoke, calm, firm, but with an undercurrent of fire that cut through the silence like a blade. "You say I oppress people," he said, his voice measured, deliberate. "But tell me, who decides what oppression is? Is it enforcing laws that every nation has? Is it protecting jobs for Americans? Is it stopping traffickers, preventing drugs from flooding our streets?" His words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Eyes flickered across the room. Some nodded, others shifted uneasily in their seats. The reporter's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. Trump took a step forward, his presence towering, commanding. "You stand here, born in this country, free to speak your mind, free to challenge the President of the United States without fear." His voice sharpened, slicing through the tension. "That's freedom!" A hush fell. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch of expression, every flicker of doubt. "Look around the world," he continued, his tone intensifying. "There are countries where reporters like you vanish for asking the wrong question. Nations where women have no voice, no rights. And yet, you call me the oppressor?" A stir rippled through the audience. A few clapped hesitantly. Others whispered among themselves, eyes darting between the two. The reporter's spine stiffened, her jaw set, but something in her gaze faltered. Trump leaned in slightly, his voice quieter now, but no less powerful. "You claim I spread hate," he said, pausing just long enough for the accusation to linger. "Tell me, has anyone stopped you from being here today? Have I silenced you? Have I threatened you?" The room held its breath. The reporter opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. Her hands tightened around her notepad, her confidence visibly shaken. The conviction in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something else, something she hadn't expected. Trump let the moment stretch, watching her carefully. Then he leaned back, his expression unreadable. The reporter felt a strange weight settle in her chest, one she hadn't expected. Everything she had believed about him, everything she had been told, now felt uncertain. There was more to him than she had allowed herself to see. The confidence she had wielded like a weapon only minutes ago felt misplaced. She exhaled, her grip loosening on the microphone. Then, with a slow nod, she met his gaze. "I accept it," she said, her voice softer now. "I see it differently." A murmur swept through the crowd. Gasps, whispers. Some exchanged glances, stunned by the shift. Others sat in silent contemplation. Trump studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod of approval. "That takes courage," he said. "Most wouldn't admit it." His tone wasn't mocking. There was respect in his words. "I appreciate that." Then, with a slight smirk, he gestured toward his team. "I have to be somewhere, but let's continue this conversation. Come to my office, we'll sit down and talk about it." The applause started small, then grew, not forced, not hesitant, but measured. Something had changed. Even those who had entered with their minds set now watched him differently, their expressions unreadable. Trump gave a final nod, then turned and strode off the stage. The energy in the room lingered, charged with something unspoken. The debate had ended, but the conversation had only just begun. If this story resonated with you, there's more to discover. Tap the video on your screen to dive into another powerful tale of courage, conviction, and the unexpected moments that change everything. An eye-opening journey awaits. Don't miss it.